He denied her food while she was pregnant. But what he didn't know was that the starving woman he mocked was carrying the boy who would rise from hunger to feed an entire nation, while he begged for crumbs at her doorstep. You won't believe how karma turned the table. Naria was a gentle, kind-hearted girl from the small village of Nabari. She had dreams like any other young woman, to love and be loved, to raise a family in peace. When Gundo, the richest yam farmer in the village, asked for her hand in marriage, her family rejoiced. He was tall, strong, and respected by many, but behind his proud smile hid a cold heart that few truly knew. On their wedding day, Naria's eyes sparkled with hope. She believed love could grow, but Gundo had different ideas. To him, Naria was not a partner, she was property. As the months passed, Naria tried to be the perfect wife. She cleaned, cooked, worked in the fields, and never complained. Yet nothing pleased Gundo. If the stew was too salty, he shouted. If his robe had a wrinkle, he threw it in her face. She spoke kindly. He barked back. He told his friends she was weak and slow. They laughed, and Naria heard every word through the thin walls of their hut. Then, Naria found out she was pregnant. She smiled through her tears, thinking maybe this child would bring peace. She told Gundo with trembling hands, hoping he'd hold her, show warmth. Instead, he frowned. "And now you'll get lazy," he said. "Another mouth to feed?" Naria stood silent. He turned his back and left the room. From that moment, things got worse. Gundo became colder. He used her pregnancy as an excuse to insult her. He accused her of pretending to be tired to avoid chores. When she sat down for a moment, he called her useless. If she asked for help, he mocked her. "Women have carried children since time began," he would say. "You're not special." He refused to give her extra food, saying she hadn't earned it. Even when her belly grew and her hands swelled from the heat, he kept the best yams for himself. She often went to bed hungry, her arms wrapped around her stomach, whispering softly to the child growing inside her. Naria cried sometimes, but only when alone. She didn't want the baby to feel sadness. She whispered songs to her unborn child, promising that better days would come. Every day she worked with a weak body, carrying buckets of water, sweeping dust from their doorstep, planting yams with shaking hands. But no matter what she did, Gundo never softened. He never touched her belly, never asked how she felt. To him, she was just a shadow moving around his house. And still, Naria stayed kind. She endured the pain, not because she was weak, but because she believed in love, in the power of a mother's heart. What she didn't know was that the child inside her, growing quietly despite the hunger and harsh words, would one day rise so high that the same man who starved them would kneel at his feet. But that part of the story was yet to come. Each day in Gundo's home felt longer than the last. Naria's belly was growing, but her body was shrinking. Gundo had become crueler than ever, refusing to give her proper meals. "A woman who does nothing all day doesn't deserve to eat like a queen," he'd say, tossing her a tiny plate of dry porridge or nothing at all. He claimed she needed to learn humility, that she had grown too proud since becoming pregnant. In truth, it was his own pride that blinded him. Naria never begged. She would nod quietly and walk away. But as her child grew inside her, so did her hunger. Her bones ached, her stomach twisted in pain. But she never let Gundo see her weakness. When he wasn't looking, she would slip out early in the morning, her steps light but tired, and search the edges of the nearby forest for wild roots and berries. She would dig quietly in the soil with her bare hands, hoping to find something, anything, that wouldn't harm her unborn child. Sometimes she'd find a handful of sour fruits, or chew bitter leaves just to calm the ache in her belly. She boiled roots in secret, and drank the broth slowly, imagining it was a full meal. At night, while Gundo snored loudly, full and satisfied, Naria sat outside under the stars, sipping water from a broken clay pot, whispering prayers to the sky. She never complained, not once. She simply endured. She wore loose cloth to hide her thinning frame. Her eyes stayed bright, even though her body grew weaker. In the village, people saw her smile and thought she was fine. No one knew the silent war she was fighting. She didn't tell her family, fearing they would come and make things worse. She wanted to protect her child, even if it meant sacrificing herself. One afternoon, after hours of working in the sun, Naria fainted in the garden. Gundo walked past her, muttering, "Lazy woman," and didn't help her up. She woke later, covered in dust, her lips dry. Still, she got up and continued working. Her love for the unborn child was her only strength. Each movement, each breath, was for the life growing inside her. Every time her stomach growled, she whispered to it, "I'm still here. Don't give up." She refused to let Gundo's cruelty define her. Even when her legs trembled, even when her eyes blurred with hunger, she held on. Her silence was not weakness, it was power. She carried her pain like a secret weapon, believing that one day this suffering would not be in vain. What Gundo didn't know was that while he tried to break her spirit with hunger, he was feeding a fire inside her, one that would grow stronger and brighter and eventually change their world forever. One night, as Naria sat alone behind the hut, chewing on dry leaves just to calm her hunger, she heard the soft rattle of a cart passing through the village. The moonlight lit up the face of a man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He was Omaki, a spice seller who travelled from village to village, trading herbs and stories. He noticed Naria sitting in the shadows, her arms wrapped tightly around her stomach. Most would have walked past, but Omaki's heart paused. The next evening, he returned quietly, pretending to check his cart near her hut. When no one was looking, he placed a bundle wrapped in cloth on a rock beside her. Inside were roasted groundnuts, dried fruits, and soft yam bread. Simple food, but enough to give her strength. Naria stared at the bundle, then looked up at him with wide, tearful eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but he gently raised his hand. "Say nothing," he whispered. "Eat, grow strong." From then on, Omaki returned every few nights. He brought whatever he could spare: boiled beans, sweet maize, even warm soup in a small clay pot. He always came when the village slept, always left without asking for thanks. Naria didn't know why he cared, but his kindness was like rain on dry land. It gave her hope. With each meal, she felt life return to her fingers, her feet, her breath. Her baby kicked stronger, as if saying thank you too. One night, as Naria finished her quiet meal, Omaki stayed a little longer. He looked at her closely, his eyes shining. "You are not just any woman," he said softly. "You are a well, and one day your waters will feed others." She looked confused, but he smiled deeper. "This hunger, this pain, it is shaping something powerful. One day, your hunger will feed nations." Naria placed her hand on her belly, the baby moving beneath her skin. She didn't fully understand his words, but they wrapped around her heart like warmth. No one had ever spoken to her with such belief. She whispered, "Thank you," and Omaki simply nodded and walked away, his cart softly rattling into the night. From that day, Naria's spirit began to change. She still starved by day, still worked with shaking hands, still heard Gundo's cruel words, but at night she remembered Omaki's blessing. She held onto it like a treasure, repeating it in her mind when her knees buckled or her belly cried out in pain. She began to believe that her suffering had purpose, that this child she carried would not just survive, but thrive. Omaki never came back after the 7th night, but the memory of his kindness stayed with her. He had fed more than her stomach, he had fed her soul, and soon the world would see what that small act of kindness had awakened. The wind howled outside as dry dust covered the village of Nduka. Crops had withered, rivers had shrunk to thin, muddy trails. People whispered of famine spreading fast, yet inside a tiny clay hut, something powerful was happening. Naria, thin and trembling, lay on a straw mat, alone. Her screams were swallowed by the silence of a home that had never known kindness. With no midwife, no help, and no comfort, she brought her son into the world with nothing but sheer will. She named him Tomani, which meant strength in hunger. He was small, but his cry was fierce. Naria held him close, her face streaked with sweat and tears. She had nothing to wrap him in except a worn shawl, and no food to offer her own body for milk. Still, her love poured out of her eyes, warming him in ways cloth could not. When Gundo finally stepped into the hut, he didn't look at the baby. He scoffed and rolled his eyes. "This is the boy that made you weak," he said coldly. "He looks like he won't even survive the season." Naria didn't answer. She only rocked Tomani gently, whispering words of comfort as if shielding him from his father's bitterness. Days passed. Naria's strength faded, but she refused to give up. She mashed wild roots into a thin paste, fed Tomani drops with a leaf. He cried often, his tiny fists clenched, his eyes wide and searching. But even as famine crept through the village, even as people grew desperate, Naria protected him like a lioness, fierce and watchful. Gundo continued to ignore them both. He ate in secret, kept supplies hidden in a locked box, and told the neighbors that his wife was lazy and his son a burden. "He won't be useful," Gundo told a trader. "Can't even lift his own head." But what Gundo didn't see was the quiet fire in Tomani's little soul. The baby clung to life with a strength that shocked even Naria. Each night, when she thought he would give up, he surprised her. A strong cry, a new movement, a steady breath. It was as if something greater than both of them was keeping him alive. The famine worsened, but Naria's focus never broke. She slept little, ate less, but smiled whenever Tomani stirred. He was her reason, her purpose. She whispered stories to him under the moonlight, telling him he was born in hunger, but not born to suffer, that he would grow, not just to survive, but to give others what he never had. The villagers didn't know it yet, but in the middle of their hardest season, a boy had been born who would one day bring abundance. While Gundo turned his back, life quietly bloomed in the arms of the woman he once starved, and that life was named Tomani. In the far corner of Gundo's land, behind the animal pens and broken tools, stood a tiny hut made of mud and straw. It was dark, cramped, and smelled of damp earth, but it was the only home Naria and little Tomani had. Gundo had pushed them there, away from the main house, as if hiding a shame he didn't want the world to see. He rarely spoke to them, and when he did, it was only to insult or demand silence. Naria did her best with what little she had. She patched the roof with old cloth and taught Tomani to be thankful for even the smallest meal. They often survived on scraps, crushed maize, rotten fruits from the market, or bones left after the dogs had eaten. Still, Naria kept her spirit gentle. She never cursed her life. Instead, she hugged her son tightly each night, whispering, "You are more than this place. One day, they'll see." Tomani didn't talk much. He grew up watching more than speaking. His eyes followed every ant trail, every bird's flight, every leaf that moved with the wind. While other children laughed and played, Tomani sat quietly, building things from sticks or tracing animal footprints in the dirt. He learned which plants healed wounds, which bark stopped hunger pains, and which trees gave the sweetest shade. Nature was his teacher, and his mother was his light. Every morning before the sun rose, Tomani helped Naria fetch water from the muddy stream. He carried heavy pots with steady hands, though he was still just a boy. He swept the hut, washed their worn clothes, and shared whatever food they found. If a trader threw away half a mango, Tomani would race to grab it, not for himself, but for Naria. "Mama eats first," he always said. He watched Gundo from afar, never speaking to him unless forced. He noticed how the man stored grain in secret, how he sold food for profit while the village starved. Tomani understood more than he let on. He listened to how adults spoke, learned how to read faces, and remembered every harsh word his mother endured. But he kept silent. His time had not yet come. At night, when the world grew quiet, Naria told him stories, not of pain, but of power. She spoke of ancient kings who rose from nothing, of rivers that changed their path, of seeds that pushed through rock. Tomani never forgot those words. He would lie awake, staring at the roof, dreaming of a day he could make things different. He wanted to give his mother the world she never had. He didn't know how, but he knew he would. They had no money, no comfort, and no one to protect them. But in that shadowed hut, something strong was growing. A boy with eyes like fire and a heart shaped by love and hunger. Quiet now, but watching, learning, waiting. His name was Tomani, and his story was just beginning. Tomani was 15 when the drought hit hardest. The sky hadn't opened in months, and the earth had cracked like broken pottery. Even the elders said they had never seen hunger like this. Crops died before sprouting, animals lay lifeless under trees, and children's laughter had turned into weak cries. Gundo's fields, once filled with maize and yams, were now a stretch of dust and bones. He blamed everyone but himself, especially Naria and Tomani, saying they brought misfortune to his land. One afternoon, Tomani wandered farther than usual, drawn by a strange stillness near the riverbed. The water was almost gone, just a shallow trail glistening beneath the rocks. As he bent down to drink, something shimmered in the mud. It wasn't gold, but it glowed gently like it held the sun inside it. It was a seed, small, round, and warm to the touch. He held it in his palm, confused, yet fascinated. It pulsed softly, like it was alive. Tomani didn't tell anyone. He hid it inside his shirt and walked home in silence. That night, while Gundo and the others slept, he crept out to the abandoned field behind the house, the same one Gundo had cursed and left to rot. The soil was dry, hard as stone, but Tomani knelt and dug with his bare hands. He placed the glowing seed in the hole and covered it gently with dust. Every day, he returned to the spot, watering it with whatever drops he could save. Rainwater from banana leaves, leftover cooking water, even his own drinking share. Naria noticed her son was thirstier than usual, but said nothing. She trusted his silence. Tamani whispered to the seed each time, like it was a friend. He didn't know what it was or why it called to him, but he believed in it. Somehow, he felt it would change everything. A week passed, then 2. Nothing happened. Still, Tamani came back every evening. Then one morning, just as the sun cracked through the dry sky, he saw it, a tiny green sprout pushing through the dust. It was unlike any plant he had seen. Its leaves shimmered slightly, as if kissed by morning dew that hadn't fallen. Tamani's heart raced. The field was cursed no more. He didn't tell Gundo. Instead, he cleared the space around the plant in secret, covering it during harsh winds, watering it at night, and guarding it from goats. Within days, it grew taller than his knee, then to his waist, then his chest, and then, without warning, it began to bloom. Fruit burst forth, plump golden pods that gave off a sweet scent no one in the village had smelled before. Tamani stared in awe. From dry dust, life had returned. Not just any life, but something powerful. He didn't know what this seed truly was, or who had sent it, but he knew one thing. It wasn't just a plant, it was a beginning, and he had planted it in silence, with faith, in the very land they had all given up on. The golden crop grew faster than anyone could believe. Within just a few weeks, what started as a tiny green sprout had taken over the once dead field. Tall stalks with wide golden leaves shimmered under the dry sun. The fruit it bore looked like nothing the villagers had ever seen, thick, glowing pods with a rich, sweet smell that traveled on the wind. Even without rain, the plants thrived, their roots strong and deep, pulling life from the driest soil. Tamani watched in silence, his eyes wide with wonder. He still hadn't told anyone about the seed. Every morning before the sun rose, he came to the field and gently touched the leaves, whispering thanks. He didn't need to say much. The plants seemed to understand. The fruit wasn't just beautiful. When he took a bite, it melted on his tongue, sweet, filling, and energizing. It felt like it carried strength in every piece. But Tamani didn't keep it to himself. The very next day, he carried 3 pods and gave one to his mother. Her eyes filled with tears the moment she tasted it. For the first time in years, her stomach felt full. She hugged her son tightly, not asking questions, just thanking him with her eyes. The second pod, he gave to an old man who lived nearby and hadn't eaten in 2 days. The third, he left by the doorstep of a pregnant woman whose husband had died in the drought. He didn't need praise. He just wanted people to feel hope again. Soon, word spread. One by one, people came to see the miracle field. At first, they whispered, not believing their eyes. But the moment they tasted the golden fruit, their faces lit up with disbelief and joy. "Who planted this?" they asked. "How does it grow without rain?" Tamani stepped forward quietly and said, "I only planted a seed." He didn't mention the glow or the riverbed or the long nights of watering it in secret. He simply smiled and offered more fruit. Then came the requests. "Can we grow this in our land? Can you share the seeds?" Without hesitation, Tamani began saving seeds from every ripe pod. He dried them carefully, counted them, and handed them out with instructions. Plant deep, water with care, speak gently. The villagers followed every word, and just like that, new sprouts began to rise across the village. Every home that had once gone silent from hunger now sang with hope. Gundo, who had once cursed his own land and mocked his son, stood frozen at the edge of the field, unable to believe what he saw. His own hands, once proud and powerful, had failed him, but the boy he called weak had planted something that could feed the world. And as more and more families returned to life, laughter, and full bellies, they didn't just thank Tamani, they called him the boy who planted hope in the middle of hunger. Tamani didn't stop after feeding just his village. He saw the hunger in the eyes of travelers who passed by. He remembered the pain in his mother's face when there was nothing to eat. That memory never left him. So instead of selling the golden crop for riches, he used it for something greater. He built a small wooden structure on the edge of the village and called it Ukombe Granary. It began with baskets of the golden fruit, stacked neatly for anyone who was hungry. There were no prices, no guards, no restrictions, just one rule: take only what you need and return when you can. At first a few families came, then more. Word spread like fire across dry land. Villages from far away sent messengers. Some came walking for days, carrying starving children in their arms. When they arrived, they found something they hadn't seen in months. Food, freely given, full of strength and warmth. Tamani welcomed them all, never asking for names or favors. He believed no one should suffer just because they were born with less. The golden crops never stopped growing. It was as if the earth itself had made a promise to the boy who once lived in a back hut. With every harvest, Tamani sent baskets to nearby villages. When he ran out of carriers, he trained young volunteers. He taught them how to plant the miracle seed, how to care for it, and how to share without pride. Within months, Ukombe Granary had branches in 5 more villages. The region started to change. Markets that were once empty now sold golden fruit beside other crops. Schools reopened because children had energy to learn. Mothers danced again. The famine slowly faded, not because of rain, but because of one boy's quiet courage. Leaders took notice. Chiefs invited Tamani to their councils. Farmers came to study from him. Reporters from big towns wrote about the boy farmer of Ukombe. But Tamani never let it go to his head. He still walked barefoot. He still helped his mother cook dinner. He still whispered thanks to the earth every morning. People began to call him son of the soil, and mothers told their children bedtime stories about the boy who grew food in a famine. His name became a symbol of hope. Some said the blessing of the spice seller had come true, that the boy who was once starved in silence had grown into the man who would feed generations. And in the middle of it all stood Tamani, not with a crown or a throne, but with dirt under his fingernails, a calm smile, and fields full of golden life. As the fields of gold stretched wider, and the name Tamani echoed through villages far and near, Gundo sat bitter in his empty compound. He had watched everything from a distance. The visitors, the praises, the laughter, and none of it was for him. His own farm, once a symbol of pride, was dry and cracked. He could no longer bear the thought of his son, the boy he once called weak, now being honored as a hero. The jealousy burned deeper than any drought. One morning, dressed in his finest robe, Gundo marched to the central market square where Tamani was helping distribute food. He stood on a stool and shouted, "These miracle seeds came from my land. I am the father of the boy, the owner of the soil. Without me, none of this would exist." The crowd went silent. Tamani looked at him, not with hate, but with quiet disappointment. Before Tamani could respond, a familiar voice cut through the silence. "Lies from a starving heart," said the voice. Heads turned. An old man, still wearing a patched brown robe and a sack of spices slung across his back, stepped into the crowd. It was Omaki, the spice seller who had once fed Naria in the dark. He walked slowly, but with power, each step reminding Gundo of the night he turned away from his pregnant wife. "I knew this day would come," Omaki said. "This boy's strength did not come from you. It came from the hunger you gave him. It came from the tears you ignored. And this seed," he said, holding up a small wooden box, "was a gift of the earth to a heart that stayed kind in suffering." He turned to the crowd and told them everything. How Naria had starved in silence. How Tamani was raised on roots and rainwater. How Gundo had mocked his own son. Omaki then handed the box to the village elder. Inside was the first glowing seed Tamani had planted, wrapped in the cloth Naria used to carry him as a baby. The elder opened the box, looked at Gundo, and said, "A man who plants nothing but pain cannot harvest honor." The crowd turned on Gundo. His workers left him. The village removed his name from the council list. People stopped buying from his remaining fields. He begged for forgiveness, but no one listened. Not out of hatred, but because the truth had opened every eye. Gundo, once feared and admired, became a man forgotten. His wealth dried up. He wandered the same roads where once Naria had walked alone, and as he passed a young girl eating golden fruit from the Ukombe granary, she offered him some. He lowered his head and said, "No, child, I once denied that to your kind." And he walked away, hungry, not for food, but for the honor he had thrown away with his cruelty. Tamani stood before a beautiful building made of smooth red clay and golden stone. Children played outside, laughter echoing in the breeze. Above the entrance, carved into wood, were the words, "House of Naria." It wasn't just a shelter. It was a home for widows, orphans, and pregnant women who had been abandoned, just like his mother once was. Inside, there were warm meals, clean beds, and hands ready to help. Every corner whispered Naria's name, not with sorrow, but with honor. Tamani had built it not for praise, but for memory. He remembered the nights when Naria went to bed hungry just so he could eat. He remembered the way she smiled through pain, how she never begged, never cursed, just worked quietly, believing in a better day. Now that day had come, and her love had fed thousands. One morning, as Tamani sat on the front step handing out bowls of porridge, a bent figure shuffled into the line, clothes torn, eyes sunken, hands trembling. It was Gundo. The man who once starved Naria now held out his hands for food. The villagers fell silent, watching the scene unfold. Would Tamani shame him? Would he turn his back? Tamani stood, walked to him slowly, and looked into the eyes that had once ignored him. He said nothing for a moment, just studied the face of a man who once had everything but gave nothing. Then softly, he took the bowl from Gundo's hand. "I cannot let you eat here," he said gently. "Not because I hate you, but because this place was built by the hands you once hurt. If I serve you here, it will dishonor the name above the door." Gundo's lips trembled. "I am hungry," he whispered. Tamani nodded. "Then remember this hunger, not for pity, but so that you never plant pain again. Go where your pride once kept you from going. Learn from those you once mocked." Before Gundo could speak again, Tamani placed a small bag of grains and a jug of water in his hands. "This is not revenge, it's a reminder," he said. "Starve not the womb that bears tomorrow's abundance." With those words, he turned back to the line, smiling at a young pregnant woman as he handed her food. The villagers stood in awe, not just of Tamani's success, but of his heart. He had risen without bitterness, led without revenge. Years later, the house of Naria stood taller, spreading across villages like branches of a mighty tree. And every time a mother held her fed child, every time a beggar was given bread, the world remembered a woman who once survived on wild roots, because she believed her son would one day feed generations. And he did. If this story touched your heart, then let it remind you, never look down on the struggling, for tomorrow they may rise and feed the world. Naria's pain became a seed of greatness. Her silent sacrifice gave birth to a hero who fed thousands. And even when faced with the man who caused them pain, Tamani chose dignity over revenge. How many mothers are starving in silence today, believing in their children's future? How many kind hearts are quietly carrying burdens, hoping the world will one day notice? If this story opened your eyes, don't let it stop here. Let's honor all the silent warriors like Naria. Share this story with someone who needs hope. Like this video if you believe kindness always wins. And subscribe to our channel for more powerful, heart-touching African tales that remind us of love, struggle, and triumph. Your support keeps these stories alive. Thank you for watching. Stay kind, stay hopeful, and remember, starve not the womb that bears tomorrow's abundance.